Thanks for downloading this edition of NewsHour Extra. And the topic this week is a cashless society. Now, we actually recorded this a short while ago. The reason being that we're playing it now, that we're working on various other things coming up. So lots of pre-production going on other programmes. But this one is an important topic. It is the question of whether we could go cashless, and if so, what would the implications be for governments and for individuals? And it's a complicated subject, but that's exactly what we try to do on NewsHour Extra. I hope it's all clear. So here it is, this week's NewsHour Extra, the cashless society. It used to be a matter of some note that the King or Queen of England never carried cash. The idea was that there were always attendants on hand to manage the grubby business of actually paying for whatever took his or her fancy. But today, many people go through their daily lives without touching a coin or note. In Sweden, many homeless people have been given card readers so they can take donations via card from passers-by. So is cash, notes and coins, going to be a thing of the past? What would a truly cashless society look like? And what are the implications for the increased amount of information governments would have about us? There is a reason people dodging tax want to use cash. It's much more difficult to trace payments. And where do digital so-called cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin fit in? We'll get to the complicated stuff in the second half of the programme, but we'll start with the easier sides of things, the pounds and the dollars, the cents and the pence, the cash backed by central banks like the Bank of England or the Federal Reserve in the US. And to discuss the future of cash, I'm joined here in the studio in London by Dave Birch, Director of Innovation at Consult Hyperion, an electronics transactions consultancy. We'll ask you to decode that later.
Good evening.
And a visiting professor at the University of Surrey Business School. And we've got Brett Scott, author of The Heretic's Guide to Global Finance, Hacking the Future of Money. And he is a former derivatives broker and a senior fellow at the Finance Innovation Lab. And from Cambridge, Massachusetts, we've got Lana Schwartz, who's an assistant professor of media studies at the University of Virginia. And in Nairobi, in the BBC bureau there, Michael Kimani, co-founder and CEO at Umati Blockchain Limited. And that's a company bringing Bitcoin technology to East Africa. And we'll hear all about that, Michael, in a bit. But first of all, I just want to know how cashless you lot are. So why don't you start, Brett? Any cash on you?
Yes, I have coins and notes.
Very old-fashioned of you.
Yeah, I actually just bought an orange juice with some coins at the shop.
Dave?
No.
No cash?
No.
You don't carry cash?
No. Well, generally not, no.
Where does that lead you into trouble? So someone just told me you tried to get a coffee in a BBC machine and it needed cash.
It only takes cash, so I couldn't get a coffee there. It's a tragic introduction to the show.
Lana Schwartz, have you got any cash on you?
I do. I have coins and notes, and I also have a number of strange things like a Berkshire, which is a piece of currency printed by a local alternative currency group in Western Massachusetts, all kinds of loyalty cards.
Hang on, just that one, the local currency, what's that?
So a group of folks in the Berkshire Mountains, an area in Western Massachusetts, got together and decided to create a currency that would only be used in their local community. And they can decide to get a certain amount of their paycheck if they work for one of those small local businesses in the Berkshire, and they can spend it at the local businesses. I think it's really more of a kind of statement of community solidarity than it is an actual, system of economic exchange. But it's been going on for decades, and there are local currency groups like this all over the world.
I see. I never knew about that, and we'll maybe hear what that means later on. And Michael Kimani in Nairobi, you've got cash on you, I think?
No, actually. I only have M-Pesa and a debit card on me and some Bitcoins on my phone. I don't have any cash.
Bitcoins, M-Pesa and your cards?
Yeah, and one bank card.
People in advanced countries don't need cash anymore, Owen.
But we're going to hear what M-Pesa is taking Nairobi way ahead of London in a moment. But first of all, let's just deal with this basic question of whether it is going to be possible for two of our guests not having cash to live satisfactorily, and what the advantages are of a cashless society. So, Dave Birch, why don't you get us underway? You've come here without any cash. You didn't get your coffee, but you're basically happy, I think, to be cashless. Why is it a good thing?
I think you can break it into sort of three separate areas, really. So There's an issue around economic efficiency. Cash is obviously rather inefficient as a mechanism. The costs of cash are very high. I mean, they're very diffuse, but they're very high, and they also fall very unfairly on the least well off. So I think there's an argument for innovation and invention. If everybody was using electronic money, then inventive people like Brett would build new applications, new services, new products on top of it, which would be fantastic and would be open to everybody. And there's an inescapable law enforcement argument, which is that even the Bank of England's own figures say that I think a quarter of the money that's in circulation is used for what they call transactional purposes. Most of the cash out there is really only used for money laundering, drug dealing, tax evasion, and so on.
Just on the one you're saying it's expensive, I sort of get that in that you've got to print it and it's actually more expensive than you'd think to do that. But why would that fall disproportionately on the poor?
Well, if I nip out at the ATM in the middle of the night to get 300 quid to buy some cocaine, I don't really care if the ATM's going to charge me £2 or £3 or something like that. But if I'm on benefits and I'm trying to draw out £10, the costs of cash acquisition are significant. Also, if you're trapped in a cash economy, you don't have access to the special offers, the good deals, being able to buy things online. You're at the mercy of people who are unscrupulous. It's the poor people who are trapped in the cash economy who are mugged and robbed and they lose their money and have no insurance and so on. People in the middle classes in the UK, they're essentially debit card users. And I think that can't be right. I think we need more of a sort of national strategy towards this.
Okay, before we go to Lana and class politics, let's deal with Michael, who's also cashless. So are you similarly enthusiastic and see these advantages, Michael?
I think what I've observed here is cash is on the decline, but it's on some segments really, because the only reason I have debit card and M-Pesa on me, it's because where I'm coming from, I just boarded a taxi here, and where I'm going to, I can easily pay for things with M-Pesa or with my debit card. But 2 months ago, I was staying somewhere completely different, like a mix of rural and urban, and there's a wider places out there where cash is still the major form of transaction. So there's a bit of class element here where most people who are using these cashless transactions often and regularly are more likely to be found in the posh suburbs of Kileleshwa, for example, like where I'm coming from. But a large part of the population doesn't live around such places. They live somewhere where a lot of transactions are conducted in cash.
But what to you is the advantage of using these electronic methods you're describing rather than using cash?
So, like now I'm safe. If I'm carrying this, I know there's no way I'm going to lose money. I also think it's a fast way to pay. I can make remote payments right now. I could send money to my aunt in the rural areas right now in 1 minute. So there is an efficiency of using cashless transactions.
Lana Schwartz, can you just tell us your view on this? The basic issue here is cashlessness coming? And in, 10, 15, 20 years, will there really be very small amounts of cash around? What do you think?
Well, I would say that rumors of the death of cash at this point are highly overstated. That's not to say that it isn't coming, but I think that people have been dreaming of a cashless society for almost as long as cash has existed. So I think about Edward Bellamy, who wrote in the 1880s about the coming cashless future. Of course, he dreamed of this sort of state utopianism where we would all use a credit card to access, cooperatively produced goods and services. And then I think about the 1960s, where people were imagining, again, that cashlessness was just around the corner. But for them, it was about this sort of seamlessness of travel. But to me, it's sort of like the paperless office, which is now over 30 years old. It's this vision that we keep having just around the corner that's as much a part of idealized modernity as the jetpack. But in terms of whether or not cashlessness would be a good thing or a bad thing, I don't think it would necessarily be a bad thing. And I don't think there's any reason to fetishize cash for cash's sake. But I do think that having a public infrastructure for everyday payment is a huge achievement. And it's something we should think very carefully as we try to attempt to replace it.
But actually, just to break in, it is being replaced, isn't it? I mean, if you go to the UK, it's now, I think, 52% of transactions are non-cash. In Scandinavia, cash is much less important than it used to be. It is sort of going out of fashion.
I would say that fashion of cashlessness is not evenly distributed across the world. There are countries where almost all transactions are done in cash, and there are countries where we're seeing more and more cashlessness. As an academic observer of this trend, I personally have had a hard time finding particularly good data on the actual volumes of transactions, in part because many of these reports are either produced by the electronic payments industry or the cash handling industry, both of which have their own agendas. But I do think that even though we are seeing a decline in the use of cash, anecdotally, broadly based, it's hard to know whether we're moving towards a cash light society or a society in which cash is used less and less, but used for particular purposes or by particular people. And I think it remains to be seen whether that solves the kind of class problems that Dave points to or whether it creates new ones.
And Brett Scott, how do you see the future panning out in terms of the amount of cash that will be used?
The key proponents of this future story about the impending cashless society often comes from the payments industry itself. One of the key ways that you promote your interest in society is to talk about things as if they're inevitable. So you say them as if they're already happening, and then everyone else sort of feels slightly stupid for not realizing that they're behind the curve somehow. So there's a big, just be aware that a lot of the narrative pushed out comes from these companies. And they often want you to think about cash as being this dirty, inefficient, crime-ridden type of system. But it's really not apparent that actually the alternative offers solutions to those problems. I mean, actually, for many people, cash is a pretty efficient, easy, flexible system to use for small transactions. And actually, one of the reasons why, Dave said poor people, the costs of cash fall on them. Actually, the payment systems are often inaccessible to poorer people simply because they're not profitable enough for payments companies to take them on as customers.
A lot of poor people don't have bank accounts.
Exactly. So cash is actually one of the few things that enables them to engage in any economic.
Well, let's just put this to Dave Birch. Are you the spokesman, wittingly or unwittingly, of corporations who are trying to persuade us that we should be cashless so they can make more money?
I think there's two parts to that argument. So first of all, you've got to break out what somebody is paying for ATMs and vans full of armoured cars and tills and all this sort of thing. So those costs are real. So even if the cost of electronic payments were exactly the same as the cost of cash payments, it would still be worth doing for the other benefits. But Brett's point is actually, I think, a slightly different point, and in my opinion, a more important point, which is to do with inclusion and access to financial services. So the way the system is structured at the moment, there are two competing tensions, because on the one hand, you've got rules about know your customer, anti-money laundering, counter-terrorist financing, politically exposed persons, which act to raise the cost of entry to the financial system. And on the other hand, you have these goals for financial and social inclusion, which you can't meet unless everybody can come into the financial system. So I agree with him that we need a more rational settlement about that. I just feel that settlement will involve electronic payments.
Right, let's just understand from Michael Kimani how things are developing in Kenya, because it's very, very interesting that, in a way, I think you've jumped a generation of technology there, so some people are saying. And I'd just like you to talk us through it, Michael, as to how this M-Pesa system works. It's been around a decade, I think?
Yeah, M-Pesa has been around for quite a while now. In fact, the other day I was trying to think about how my life was like before I started using M-Pesa, and I just couldn't pin it down. So M-Pesa is like a wallet that you just deposit some electronic funds in it. You can send money to someone who's 500 kilometers away from you. You can make utility payments. You can pay for electricity and water. And what's emerging nowadays is you can pay for government services using these electronic funds. So,
this is all on your mobile phone, right?
Yes, this is all on your mobile phone from wherever you are. You could be in the car, you could be on your bed. So there is some efficiency to that. If you're sending money from here to Mombasa, there's no other way to do that that's as quick. So a lot of the people who are using M-Pesa, they're using it for places where it's really a much superior option.
But do you need a bank account before you start using it?
All you need is your national ID, and you just walk over to the closest agent. Could be 100 meters from where you live. You sign up, and instantly you have a financial tool on your phone that you can use to access this broad array of financial services. So it's way better than a bank, for sure.
But you have to give that agent the $500 or the $100 or whatever you're starting with, right, to have the credit in your wallet?
Yes. So what happened is for electronic value, there has to be a way to convert what you have in cash into this electronic value, this M-Pesa. And right now there's a huge agency network